Is the 7,200 revolutions per minute USB 3.0 drive going to have very similar performance to an internal 7,200 revolutions per minute drive, or is it still going to be noticeably slower? I use my old 500 GB drive to store all temporary stuff, Windows temp folder, Adobe Scratch disks, etc., and anything that needs thousands of small files to avoid unnecessarily fragmenting my C drive. However, it has started slowing down a lot recently, 28,000 hours of use, so maybe it's dying. Last year I moved the page file back to C as the read/write wait was slowing the entire computer, plus an upgrade would be nice, so I was thinking about getting a 4 TB drive for temp files and games. The only reasonably priced 7,200 revolutions per minute one I found is a Toshiba USB 3.0 external drive, so I'm wondering if USB 3 is sufficient for use such as what I mentioned above. The current 1 TB external I have is a bit unreliable and slow, good for storing media but not much else, so I don't want to risk it without checking first. Update. I have the drive. Its read/write speeds are over 50% higher than every other drive I have, and in its current new state, it can write lots of small files faster than my existing drive scan. This is also using the PCT USB 3 extension, not the slots built into the motherboard. I'll update this if anything changes, but the answer to the question is there definitely doesn't appear to be any loss in performance. Update 2, 1 year later. I'm using it with an SSD for the C drive now, and there have been no problems for at least as long as I've had Windows 10. I'm using it to store around 2.3 TB of games, photos, and music, and it's still going fast. Maybe you might not get the same experience, but I'd say it's definitely worth it for saving money. Update 3, 6 years later. The initial question was posted because my experience of 5,400 revolutions per minute drives was terrible in 2015, so I was quite limited in what I felt I could buy. However, my recent purchase, WD-40 is equal if not better than my external drive, so that no longer seems to be the case. The deal breaker of my external drive is it can be heard from other rooms, so much so that I was told it sounds like I'm playing shooter games. The housing isn't too well ventilated either, and it never drops below 55°C when powered on. Perhaps chucking would be a solution to both these issues, but that's not what the question was about. The actual operation of it is still fine, however, the speed is the same, and it's been powered on for 34K hours with no bad sectors. I plan to continue using it for archival purposes, but it's unlikely I will ever buy another for the purposes outlined in the question.
USB 3.0 has an upper limit around 5.0 GB/s. SATA 3 has an upper limit of 6.0 GB/s. Regardless of overhead, these rates are far higher than what a mechanical HDD can sustain for large transfers. Most mechanical HDDs won't be able to sustain more than about 1.5 GB/s HDD speed results. So I doubt you would notice much difference in performance. Real-world performance would be affected more by the HDD, chipset and drivers. Be sure to keep your drivers up to date. Just remember to treat your external HDDs gently. Don't knock them while they're running, this could damage the platters. I still tend to eject my USB disks that I use for backups just to be sure they stay reliable.
USB will always be slower than SATA because of protocol overhead, at least. You also must consider that USB is one transfer at a time, which means any other device connected to USB will degrade performance of the USB HDD. While theoretically using one USB root for one USB HDD might yield good results, in practice every computer has a plethora of other devices connected to USB. But, even if you buy an external drive, which usually houses the slowest available model, you can always rip open the enclosure and take the HDD out. Unless your computer is a laptop without a 3.5 inches bay and the external drive is 3.5 inches, which would explain the price difference. Then an eSATA port would give the best performance.
This answer is getting criticized. The main support to my answer is my personal experience. In the last 12 years I've used many USB 2.0, 3.0 external HDD for backup purpose. In my direct experience, external USB drive have always been way slower than internal drive. I know that when I need to back up 102 TB worth of data to an external USB drive, doesn't matter if it's a 3.0 USB, the only way to do it fast is dismantle the USB drive and attach the HDD directly to the PC via ATA/SATA. This is just my experience, but maybe I'm overlooked something. This night I'll try to get some numbers to support my claims. Update: at the moment I don't have external USB 3.0 drive, just old USB 2.0 HDD case, and new eSATA HDD case, so I'm unable to produce any useful data to support my claim. Clearly I'll try to produce some data whenever I find a spare USB 3.0 case. Original answer: sorry but no. An external USB 3.0 drive can be way slower than an internal drive. This is especially true if you have many small files. I know this from my experience, because I use external drive as a backup, and any external USB drive is way slower than an internal drive, or an external eSATA drive. To support my claim I've just made a simple test. Try copy 10'000 small files to both external and internal storage. Each file is 400 bytes. For external storage I've used a SanDisk Extreme Plus 128 GB flash card. It write data at 80 MB per second, faster than many mechanical HDD, and no moving parts. For internal storage I've used a 1 TB SATA HDD, Samsung HD 103 UI. Copy 10,000 files. The external SD via USB 3.0 took 150 seconds, 66 files per second, 0.03 MB per second. Copy 10,000 files. The internal HDD via SATA took 3 seconds, 3,333 files per second, 1.30 MB per second. So, using an external HDD connected with USB 3.0 is okay if you have few big files. But if you have many small files, or if you plan to use the external drive as a backup, be prepared to wait long time. On my boot HDD I have about 484,000 files. Copying these on an USB drive at 66 files per second would take more than 2 hours if all these files were just half a kilobit each.
Decent enough, surely. Very similar, it depends. There's just one single SATA standard that was always catered to fast storage applications, and even if you cut some corner, as long as you are using at least revision 2.0 there's no HDD that can outmatch that. USB is a far more intricate beast. First of all, you should check your disk cache setting. At least on Windows, this is disabled by default on removable drives, leading to some extra bottlenecks already just with USB 2.0. Secondly, you have to take into consideration the transport protocol. When USB mass storage was originally designed, it wasn't really much refined, since anyway USB itself was so slow that any sophistication didn't matter. Commands could only be sent serially, and each of them had to complete and return back before a new transaction could begin, which is not to say that on the user side of things you were forced to do literally one operation at a time, like instead happens with NTP, but still it was enough to cause significant overhead. On top of that, you also missed out native features like NCQ and trim. This is why more or less simultaneously with the USB 3.0 launch, the USB attached fuzzy specification was also released. Long story short, you can assume this is the actual features equivalent of attaching your hard drive internally, or if not any, at least as far as an SSD isn't involved. Where's the trick? Your entire communication stack has to support it, from drivers, to the host and device controllers. I don't believe the former two are much of a problem nowadays. Even very old USB 2.0 get reportedly to gain 10% better bus utilization out of the blue. It's the firmware in the USB SATA bridge of your enclosure to be the real crux.
If you want to support the channel, please consider subscribing.